Yes, let's do that. Luke chapter 20, verse 27. Now, as far as we can figure this, Jesus arrived in Jerusalem the day before the Sabbath, a Friday night. Well, at Bethany. Stayed that night at Lazarus' house. And then the next day was the Sabbath. He remained at Lazarus' house. The following day was the day after the Sabbath, the first day of the week, which we would call Sunday, since Jewish people celebrate their Sabbath on what we call Saturday, the seventh day. On the first day, which we would call Sunday morning, he rode the donkey into town and had a little confrontation. Then we're told in Mark, I believe in Matthew, on the morrow, which means Monday. And we've discovered all the events that happened on that Monday. And this is the week in which he's going to be crucified. Now we're in, and then there was another on the morrow. So this is now Tuesday. And he has been in the porch of the temple in confrontation with Pharisees and scribes and some Herodians. The Herodians especially asked him about, did he think it was legal to pay taxes to Caesar and so forth. And when we left off last time I was here talking with you, there was Jesus' response to that, holding up a coin. Now, he's still in the porch of the temple, and there come unto him certain of the Sadducees. Now, they're a group that do not believe in the afterlife. They don't believe in the devil or demons, and they're fuzzy on the idea of angels. And that is because they don't find it in Moses' writings, and Sadducees base everything on the Pentateuch, Moses' writings. And if it's questionable, they don't use it. And I think I've discussed that before, the distinction between the Pharisaic tradition and the tradition of the Zadokites, the mental descendants of the high priest Zadok from David's and Solomon's time. The Zadokites are mentioned in the New Testament as Sadducees. They say there's no resurrection, so they try to trick Jesus. They ask him, and let me just say that in the porch of the temple, we'll see this in a pagan place also in Athens, when St. Paul arrives in Athens and goes up to the Acropolis, to the great building, the Parthenon, and in it the Athenians house, they allow every kind of group to have their space in that huge building. And there are cynics, and there are the skeptic group. These are philosophical groups. There's the Platonists, over there's the Neoplatonists. Over there is the philosophical group known as the Epicureans, and over here is another group called the Stoics. All these different philosophical groups meet in that building in Athens. Something like that had been going on in the porch of Solomon's temple for a long time. Different Jewish groups with different mentalities would meet. Most importantly, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammah, two different philosophical groups, would argue scriptures back and forth, and that's been going on for decades now. And also Pharisees and Sadducees would meet there and argue their points. And I don't know if you've ever heard a bunch of rabbis getting together to discuss scripture. I have. And they just yell and scream at one another. And you can just imagine this going on. So the Sadducees have sat back, they've listened to Jesus answer the Herodian group and answer the Pharisees. Now the Sadducees have this question. And they say in verse 28, Master, Moses wrote unto us that if a man's brother die, having a wife, and he be childless, his brother should take the wife and raise up seed unto his brother. Now, this is a little story taken from the life of Judah's son, Judah, the son of Jacob, back in Genesis chapter 38, I believe. And you might remember that story. Judah had a son that had a wife, and the husband died, and so the wife married the brother, and then the brother died, and then the wife married the third brother, and he died, and because the old man, Judah, said, I want a child to keep my name alive in the earth, and all of that. So the girl kept marrying brothers. Personally, if I was one of several brothers who had died by marrying the same woman, I'd probably leave town as quick as I could. She's putting poison in someone's coffee or something. Everybody that marries her dies. But, and her name was Tamar, by the way, back in Genesis. Putting poison in your coffee, that always makes me think of that old joking story about Winston Churchill. He made a speech, they say, in Parliament one day, and a lady member of Parliament approached him afterwards. She disagreed with him so much, and she said, Lord Churchill, if I were your wife, I'd put poison in your coffee. And he said, Madam, if I were your husband, I would drink it. Well, anyway, these Sadducees have that kind of thing in mind. The brothers keep dying, and if a man's brother die having a wife and he be childless, his brother should take the wife and raise up seed unto his brother. There were therefore, and they're inventing, I think, a fantastic story. This is hypothetical. There were therefore 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and died childless, and the second and the third took her. And likewise, all 7 of them married this woman and left no children and died. Afterward, the woman also died. Now, in the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of them shall she be? For the 7 different men had her to wife. Now, this little debate occurs in all 3 of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Luke gives us the best version, I think. Jesus, in his response, this is one of the, in fact, maybe the only time that Jesus speaks directly to the character of the afterlife, the characteristics of the afterlife. He had told a parable about Lazarus and the rich man, but it's kind of debatable whether he was just speaking in a parable or not, as we've already discussed. But here he speaks very directly. He had told his disciples one time earlier who had asked him something about the other world, and he had told them, you don't even understand when I tell you things about this world. How will you understand if I tell you about heavenly things? So Jesus was somewhat, if not reluctant, he was reticent in telling these people things about the world to come in detail. But here he gives some interesting detail about the afterlife. He said, the sons of this world marry and are given in marriage. But they that are accounted worthy to attain that world and the resurrection from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage. For neither can they die anymore, for they are equal unto the angels, and are the children of God, being sons of the resurrection. Now, that's really something. He's implying that angels don't marry, which kind of messes up some people's idea of Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God that came in unto the daughters of men and produced, some people think it reads, they produced a race of giants. I mean, that's not my opinion, but who were the sons of God, and all the different theories. They were angels, or they were fallen angels, hence demons, or they were, well, I won't go into all of that. But Jesus makes it plain. Well, you know, in Hebrews chapter 1, the writer says, to which angel did God ever say at any time, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee? So apparently, God's not in the habit of calling angels sons of God. And now we're reading that angels, shall we say, are sexless or genderless. He doesn't quite say that, but he says they neither marry or are given in marriage. They're not created as man was to reproduce. And then he says something interesting about the resurrection there, that those who are resurrected, verse 36, neither can they die anymore. That's what we're looking at on the screen. So, not, you know, listen, Lazarus was raised from the dead, but not technically resurrected. There's a difference. He was resuscitated from the dead, but Lazarus died again. He didn't live, he's not alive today on earth. Jesus also raised the son of the widow of Nain from the dead. We don't know where that boy is. Apparently he died again. Jairus' daughter is the other one that Jesus raised from the dead. I'd love it if she were around to tell us some things, but she ain't. So we imagine she died also. Jesus, though, these are the 6 people raised from the dead before Jesus, 3 in the Old Testament and 3 in the ministry of Jesus, as we have it in the Gospels and the Old Testament. When Jesus died, he wasn't just resuscitated from death or brought back alive from the dead. Let's make this word resurrection a specialized term. Jesus was resurrected never to die again. Ain't that something? When he appears to John in the first chapter of Revelation, he introduces himself to John. And he says, I am he who was dead, but am alive. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Jesus was raised in not just raised from the dead to continue the same life as Lazarus was, but raised from the dead in a newness of life that is immortal. He will never die again. And somebody said, well, that's Jesus. He's different. Now, this is the first time, what we're looking at on the screen from Luke chapter 20. This is the first time that Jesus says, others will be resurrected never to die again. He just says it. They, the sons of the resurrection, neither can they die anymore. Now that is the first time he's mentioned that great hope, that we will live forever, not only our spirits in heaven, but our bodies resurrected from the dead. I don't know what I'll look like if that happens to me. I don't know what I'll look like when I get buried, but if I died tonight and got buried, I wouldn't want to come back looking like I do. I would hope I'd be, you know, better looking, yeah. Now, Paul says that, and we don't really know where Paul derives it from. But what Maggie just said, glorified. Paul says this corruption will put on incorruption. This mortal will put on immortality. And the corrupted seed going to the dust will spring up in a glory. So this is our belief. And I think Paul's belief springs from that thing. Now, Jesus is talking to people who don't believe in a resurrection at all, Sadducees. And he goes into these details. They are equal unto the angels. Now, David had said, where was that? Psalm 19. What is man that thou art mindful of him, O Lord? And what are the sons of men that you should care about them? For you made them a little lower than the angels. Man, here's the angels. They're in one state. In some way of David's explanation, man is lower than the angels. Now, in some other ways, we come up to be higher than the angels. Because angels desire to look into things that have been revealed to us by Jesus Christ. We come to know because we've been in sin and have returned as prodigal children to our Father and found that He forgives us and loves us and redeems us. Here we are, here are the angels. In some way we're lower than angels, but in this way, understanding our salvation, we come up to something that angels cannot fully comprehend, it seems. At this point, we're on our way up. We become equal to angels. You've heard sermons about this drawn from some statements in Revelations and in Paul, how we come up to even a better understanding than angels do. I mentioned in a Sunday service not long ago about the rings that are round about the throne, you know. There's the emerald rainbow round about the throne, and then there's the 4 and 20 elders, and then there's the 4 great living beings or natures around the throne, which I think represent 4 aspects of Christ's being. And then the 4th ring, the furthest out from the throne, are the angels, 10,000 times 10,000s and thousands of thousands of them, crying, holy, holy, holy. That's the group that's furthest out. But we are called to pass through those 4 rings around the throne and come right up to where the Lamb is, at the foot of the throne. Something that in God's plan invites us or beckons us to come closer to Him even than angels are. Now, ain't that a deal? Since the question being given by the Sadducees is about whose wife will somebody be in the afterlife? Well, I don't know how Chella feels about this, but I sure would like to hang on to her for a while in eternity. She might be glad to get shut of me. I don't know. But Jesus seems to be implying that there'll be no male or female in the afterlife. We're simply sons of God as we were eternally intended to be. Equal unto angels, and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. It's interesting that we're coming to this. I was hoping, I told Brother James some months ago, I said, I think I can get to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus in these Wednesday night teachings about the life of Christ to coincide with Easter time. Well, I'm not going to make it. I've only got 25 more minutes to finish this little debate he's having on Tuesday in the temple. We'll still have to have the events coming to Gethsemane, the Last Supper, the discussions at the Last Supper, and then the prayers in Gethsemane, and then the arrest, and then his 2 trials, one before the high priest, and then the next day before Pilate, and then the crucifixion, and then the events following the crucifixion. Each one of these things I'm listing now could be a Wednesday night service. And then the resurrection, and then several events that each one's interesting after the resurrection, and then the last discourses after the resurrection. So Brother James, I'm sorry, we ain't going to finish by Easter time in the life of Christ unless we simply read through it. But if we want to talk about it, everything, I love to take a long time with stuff. So we could be on well into May, June, or July before we finish this, okay? All right. And Jesus says, but that the dead are raised, even Moses showed in the place concerning the burning bush, when he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, since God is not the God of the dead, but of the living, then how can he's talking to Moses from the burning bush. Sorry, I've televised me these shirts with extra long sleeves. It's running me crazy. Let's see if I can tuck this in. She thinks I'm an orangutan. Here's Moses talking to God at the burning bush. Jacob has been dead for 400 years. Isaac for about 450. Abraham for a little over 500 years. They're dead. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Moses' time are dead. And yet God says to Moses, I am, not I was, Abraham's God. But I am Abraham's God, and Isaac's God, and Jacob's God. Jesus says he's not the God of the dead. He wouldn't call himself the God of dead people, only living people. This implies that Abraham is alive somewhere, as in Jesus' story of Lazarus and the rich man. Abraham is somewhere, somehow, alive and talking and looking. For all, he's the God of the living, for all live unto him. And certain of the scribes who were not Sadducees, they nodded at that. They liked it. Now, scribes are always hanging around the Pharisees every time you read in the New Testament. And the scribes and Pharisees came, or the Pharisees and the scribes. So somehow, this group calling themselves scribes are operating as reporters, do so very much aligned with the Pharisee sect. And so these scribes answer. This is the first time we find them agreeing with Jesus, and they're doing so against these Sadducee heretics. They say, Master, thou hast well said. For they durst not ask him any more question. In other words, he shut up the Sadducees. Now we've got this story, and to read it, I want you to go to Mark chapter 12, beginning with verse 28. This seems to come next. Mark 12:28. And one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, Master, I've got a question for you. And by the way, the Matthew version doesn't say that this is just a scribe, but a lawyer. That means a real scholar of the law of Moses. And he says, in your opinion, what commandment is the greatest of all? That's in Matthew, the greatest of all. In Mark, which is the first of all? And Jesus answers by quoting Deuteronomy. The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Now, that's from Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you were to ask an Orthodox Jewish person, what is the great commandment? He wouldn't go to the Ten Commandments. He would go directly to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, monotheism. The Lord our God is one Lord, and him only shall you serve. And you will teach your children and your children's children. And he goes on and tells about this gathering 3 generations at a time, you, your son, and your son's son, to understand the ways of God and to embrace the fact that He is alone. There are no other gods beside Him, and so forth. And then Jesus adds, there's another one. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind and with all thy strength. And he's jumped down from to Deuteronomy 6 verses 5. There's only one Lord, and you're called to love Him with all of your being. Okay, then Jesus adds, the second one is like it. Namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as much as thou lovest thyself. Now let's just stop. I can imagine this young scribal lawyer saying, I didn't ask you for the second one, I just asked you for the first one. And Jesus gives correctly, in that lawyer's opinion, the first one, the greatest commandment. He's nodding, and Jesus said, but wait a minute. You can't have the first one without the second one. And the second one is just as important as the first one. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Just hold it there. You can't love God without loving people. And you really don't know how to love people until you love God. And you love people as much as, if you love God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength, then you will love people as much as you love yourself. 3 loves, actually. Love God, learning to do that, you'll learn to love people. You can't really love people unless you love yourself. Coming to know the love of God, you learn a love for yourself. Somebody said, no, you got to hate yourself. You got to get rid of self. Well, I've never seen any of them do it. They preach about it. No man yet ever hated himself, his own flesh. It's in us to care about ourselves. Now, I don't love everything about me, whether I'm staring into a mirror that shows my bad haircut or lack of a haircut these days, or my face growing older, or whatever, or whether I'm looking into a mirror of my thoughts somehow, or whether I'm looking into a mirror of my feelings, or my deeds, my actions, and my emotional reactions. I don't love everything about myself. And you would be the worst kind of narcissist if you loved everything about yourself. But do you know what God does for us? He does teach us to look at ourselves the way He looks at us. And He says to you, you're my child, and I love you. Consider what it is about you that I love, and love that. When we come to love ourselves the way God does, and for the reasons that God does, then, since we're able to forgive ourselves for our flaws and pettinesses and inconsistencies, then God allows us and shows us how to love others despite their flaws and failures and pettinesses and inconsistencies. Have you ever hated someone? You just get so tired of seeing them and hearing them, you just develop a dislike for them that after a while turns into a hatred, and then you begin to examine, why do you hate that person? Well, I don't really hate him. I hate that thing he does. And when you focus on that, then suddenly you realize the reason I hate that is because it reminds me of myself. That way he has I hate that mirror that He is, because He shows me myself. Say that loud, Brother Terry. And they got it from us, didn't they? I think of the cross here. It's only been mentioned a couple of times so far in Jesus' words. Matthew, He inexplicably had told them weeks earlier, take up your cross and follow me. Take up our what? They don't know that He's going to be crucified. But that cross is made of two timbers. I give this a lot. Allow me to do it again. A vertical piece. It's fastened in the ground in a post hole in the ground. Points straight up to heaven. From earth to sky, it points. And then a horizontal piece. It's not fastened on either end. It just reaches out both ways. And it's fastened, though, in the middle to a high point on the vertical beam. The vertical beam, I think, represents, here I am, I'm a man fastened to the ground just as that post of the cross is. I can't get off the ground. No matter how I jump, I fall back to it pretty quick. But if something in me is set up right and pointing straight up to God, that represents my love for God. But what's the point of a post in the ground if it's not connected to anything, if it doesn't support anything? I can go dig a post hole and set a 4x4 in the ground out here and level it up. There it is. Brother James will come and say, what in the world are you doing, brother? What's that post for out there? Oh, we just need a post. Pointing up to God. Look, get that out of there, Brother Pat. That serves no purpose. But if I'm building a building or a fence or a clothesline, something to be attached to that post, something, then there's a reason for it. The love of God. If the vertical beam represents your love for God, there's no reason for it if it doesn't hold up something else. Am I making any kind of sense with this simplest of all parables? And the reason for the vertical beam, if you're going to crucify a man, is to have the horizontal beam that his hands can be fastened to. If the vertical beam represents your love for God, the horizontal beam reaches out and represents your love for others, for people. Your feet, if you're crucified, and Paul said, I am crucified with Christ. Your feet are nailed to the vertical beam, to your love for God. Paul says, I don't go anywhere unless the love of God constrains me. I would like to go other places, but I'm nailed here to this. Your feet, that's your goings, your plans. Your hands are your doings, your works. I don't do anything with my hands for myself. They're stretched out here for others. So there's love for God and love for man, perhaps somewhat poorly in my painting of it, but representing a horizontal love for people around us. Here's my hand. All day long have I stretched out my hands for others. Even if they're not worthy, I still stretch out my hands for them. Here's my feet, fastened to the love of God. I can't go where I want to go. The love of Christ constrains me. Those two are held together. In most depictions we see by a diagonal lashing of ropes going around them and lashed together. That node, that point where that crux, that point where they meet, where the love of God, my love for God, and my love for others is met in that one point where they're fastened. That's my love for myself. By joining those two loves together, God shows me how to love myself. Now, the reason I'm laboring on this a little bit is because I find a whole lot of people that have come to Christ, but they still haven't learned to love themselves. As someone who counsels individuals from time to time, I find too many people carry a self-loathing, and it drives them into the way they respond to other people with a loathing. The Lord wants us to consider ourselves children of God. The second is like the first love. Love the Lord thy God with all thy mind, heart, soul, and strength. And then love thy neighbor as thyself. You can neither love God well nor love your neighbor well unless you learn to love God. Adam in the garden, God made him. You're my son. Adam says, yeah, you and me, God, just the two of us. You're everything to me. You're the center of my life. You're all to me. And God said, that ain't no good. It is not good that you should be alone. What's God talking about? You've got to have someone else like you, Adam, who will not only be your mirror image and show yourself to you, but will also be your mirror image opposite. And just as you're made of dust, this other person will be made of dust. And you'll have to get along with this other person, and the two of you will bring forth the human race. And it's going to be more complicated than your relationship with me. Why isn't Adam's relationship with God enough? Why does God say this is not good? Because it's just a post sticking out of the ground that doesn't support anything. Let me make another person, and with that other person, you're going to get other people, sons and daughters, and every new person added to your life is going to add a new complication. Don't tell me how much you love me until you reflect it in the way you're able to love and deal with and pardon other people. And so our dealings with others, if I'm getting Jesus right here, Jesus said there is no other commandment greater than these. Loving God and loving people. And by loving God, and through loving people, you love yourself. And the scribe said unto him, of a truth, Master, you have well said that God is one, going back to that first commandment. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And there is none other but He. And to love Him with all the heart, with all the understanding, and all the strength. And to love his neighbor as himself is much more than whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. Now again, I don't know who this man is. Oh, by the way, the thing, love your neighbor as yourself, comes from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, if you want to make a note of that. Love your neighbor as yourself. This young scribe, also called a lawyer, is complimenting Jesus on that. You've well said, yes, yes, all that. And then he quotes Samuel's words to Saul. When Samuel told Saul, to obey God is better than burnt offerings and sacrifices. God has no pleasure in the sacrificial lamb you might offer up, Saul, if your heart is not in love with Him. God doesn't want to be appeased by rituals and offerings, or even your tithes and offerings in a monetary sense, if you're not trying to love Him and love people and love yourself. Who is this young scribe? I do not know, but I'd like to meet him. I guess I will in the resurrection. But again, I wonder if this is not the same rich young lawyer, ruler who had come to Jesus weeks earlier and now is coming back, and if that's none other than Paul. I don't know. It's just a speculation of mine. Because when we read the writings of Paul, he gets on these same themes. And when Jesus saw that he answered discreetly, that this lawyer scribe is discreet and wise, Jesus said to him, "Thou art not far from the kingdom of God." You're not quite in it, but you're heading in the right direction. And no man after that dared ask him any further question. Now we've only got 4 minutes. I think I can do this. Let's jump to the best version of what's coming up is in Matthew 22, beginning with verse 41. Matthew 22, 41. Thank you, brother. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus, instead of them asking him, they don't want to ask him any more questions. He's made everybody except this young scribal lawyer look foolish. When they've all asked him questions as a group, that individual scribe lawyer came up and asked him a question as an individual, and Jesus said, "You're not far from it." So these groups don't want to ask him any more questions. Now, while they're there, Jesus said, "Let me ask you fellows a question. What think ye of the Christ, the Messiah?" You know, the word Christ is a Greek word. It stems from the word chrism or oil, and the Christ is the anointed one. It corresponds to the Hebrew word Messiah, which also means the one with the oil poured on him, the anointed one. What think ye of the Christ? Whose son is the Messiah going to be? And they say unto him, "Oh, the Messiah, whenever he gets here, he'll be the son of David. He'll be descended from David. Kingship, eternal kingship, as God promised David." And he says to them, "Well then, if he's the son of David, why then?" And Jesus begins to speak from Psalm 110. "Why then does David, in the Spirit, call this Messiah Lord?" If he's David's descendant, why would David call him Lord? Lord in this sense means one superior to me. Saying, "The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand till I put thine enemies underneath thy feet." If David then calls the Messiah Lord, then how is he David's son? Now this is Jesus' only response to what is recently, and just only in recent weeks, since blind Bartimaeus over there in Perea had called Jesus publicly, "O Son of David, O Son of David, have mercy on me." A few weeks later, that idea that Jesus is the Son of David has finally gotten into the mouths of people, and as he rode into Jerusalem on the donkey, people are calling him, "O Son of David, the Son of David." During the first 2.5 to almost 3 years of his ministry, he had not called himself Son of David, nor had anyone else called him that. Only the blind man called him that in Matthew's version. It's 2 blind men, but that's the first time it had been said. And this is very recent. Now people have called him Son of David as he rode into Jerusalem day before yesterday. Big loud crowds saying it. So Jesus brings this up. Do you really think I'm coming to politically call myself the Son of David? You guys, some of you think I'm coming. He's going to bring this up to Pontius Pilate in a couple of days also. That I'm coming to raise a political movement together as a descendant of David's and bring an earthly kingdom back to Jerusalem. Jesus is putting down that idea right now. I'm not saying I'm not the Son of David. I'm just asking you, if I am the Son of David, why did Jesus foresee me and call me his Lord? and no one was able to answer him a word. Now, he's just dismissed one of the reasons they were hoping to crucify him over. They're going to have to find something else, because he has just dismissed, wiped out the Son of David argument. Not that he isn't, because Matthew, this writer we're looking at right now, begins his gospel back in Matthew chapter 1, saying these are the generations of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew certainly believes Jesus descended from David, as we all do as we read his genealogy in Matthew and in Luke. But Jesus is telling them, if I'm the Christ, David doesn't look down towards me. He looks up at me. And no man durst from that day forth ask him any more questions. So, what follows is Jesus now will open up. I'm just telling you, next Wednesday night I'm here. We'll get into this. This is his last public sermon, and he will denounce the scribes and Pharisees and the other groups in his harshest terms. Hypocrites. Over and over. Woe unto you, blind guides. Woe unto you, hypocrites. Woe unto you, you Pharisees. Woe unto you, you whited sepulchres. Woe unto you. He's never done this before. And this will be his last public temple speech, denouncing them loudly before the great crowd that's gathered around. We'll look at that and why Jesus calls them the things he calls them next time I speak. Has this been interesting to you tonight? Thank you so much for your attendance and your attention. Give Pastor Potter a big hand as he comes.
So I'll go ahead and stand to our feet. Just a reminder, our church anniversary is coming up. Resurrection Day is coming up, Easter. And on the 12th, we will have the Seder or the...
That's next Wednesday night. Is that right?
The 12th.
2 Wednesdays.
2 weeks, yes.
Yeah, okay, the 12th.
And so...
All right.
It's the Wednesday.
That's going to be interesting.
Yeah. So don't forget, sign-up sheets or something, or you're just going to get in touch with everybody else? Yes, okay. And we're going to have a meal together and see what the Passover looked like in the time of Christ. Father, thank you for this time tonight, and we ask you to give everyone a safe ride home. And Lord, we're looking forward to Sunday already. Hallelujah. In Jesus' name, God bless you.